Hello, everybody. Hello. Yes, thank you. Thank you for coming to my talk. Thank you for joining our discussion of SolReSol in particular, and also constructed languages in general. My talk will be separated into three parts. In the first part, we're going to talk about SolReSol and some other constructed languages. In the second part, I'm going to show you how I was working on this particular project and how a conlang enthusiast or any kind of a language enthusiast can enhance their experience, can make their project public, can raise the awareness of the public of a particular language or some particular linguistic feature. In the third part, we will have a Q&A session, but please don't hesitate to ask me any questions as we go. So that would be perfectly fine if you use the chat. I'm also reading that. Okay, so first of all, my question is there anybody who is actually familiar with SolReSol? You may write this in the chat. Because I'm interested in whether people are actually familiar with this particular language. Speaking of SolReSol, we can, of course, yes, great. Some of you are already familiar with that. So first of all, I have to say that SolReSol is a constructed language, of course. And when we talk about constructed languages, there is already something that starts in terms of terminology. Some people argue that constructed languages is not the best term. Some people prefer the term of planned languages. Some people are talking about artificial languages. We also have auxiliary languages, and they're not necessarily one and the same thing. And here you might actually recognize, I will move the window a little bit, like that. Okay. Should be fine. You may actually recognize some of these languages, some of these symbols, some of these, we can also say flags, yes, because many of these languages do have their flags and logos. So how many can you name? I'm actually wondering, yes. Yes, I see. Okay. Yeah, so I will keep the chat like this, yes. Yes, and Kuenya, yes, a good eye for that. Volapuk, as we see. Ido, Lojban, as well, SolReSol itself. Yes, and of course, the most popular, without any doubt, language by the number of speakers, Esperanto. And there is the conlang flag, yes, the infamous Tower of Babylon as well. So by definition, a constructed language, as you can see, is a language whose phonology, grammar, and vocabulary, meaning lexis, of course, instead of having developed naturally, are consciously devised for some purpose, which may include being devised for a work of fiction. In that case, we're sometimes talking about the so-called artlangs, which is another term. And Quenya, of course, would be classified as such a language. And constructed languages have got a very complicated history. Of course, we all know, everybody has heard of Esperanto, even most people who have no idea of what constructed languages are in general, definitely have heard of such language as Esperanto. But I would say that somehow the role of constructed languages in the modern world, in the modern paradigm, has somehow changed. And from the initial idea of this language replacing such natural, even though some people argue against this term, languages as English, it has evolved into being more than that. It is also an instrument, a tool, we can say, of introspection, of self-reflection as well. So while learning constructed languages, or not even necessarily learning, but discovering them, analyzing them, we're also able to understand the cultural codes, how our languages and cultures work. And this is the way for us to know more about the languages that already exist. And in addition to that, of course, there is the aesthetic value of these languages. And SolReSol, of course, is a language that puts high emphasis on aesthetics. Here you can see François Sudre, who by his education, in terms of his education, was a musician. He was a teacher of music, a violinist. And he is famous for more than just SolReSol. So believe it or not, but the word telephone and phone that we have got in the modern English language, and of course in the majority of languages in the world, and especially in the European languages, we have got this word thanks to him, in case you didn't know that. So here you can see on this paper that he is également inventeur de la téléphonie. So he is actually the person who invented this word. Of course, not in order to describe the device that we have got nowadays, because the device was invented many decades later, but he was the one who created this word téléphonie. And of course, we understand that it means a transmission of some sounds at a distance. So his initial idea of communicating through sounds of music rather than sounds of a natural language is something that created this particular word that we're using nowadays. SolReSol itself is a constructed or artificial, as we have said, intentionally created musical language. And we said that it was devised almost 2 centuries ago. It is a unique language because it uses a multitude of ways of speaking and writing. It uses an unlimited number, we can say, of semiotic systems, meaning the systems that we can use in order to designate some meaning, in order to express some meaning. It can use the 7 spectral colors, the colors of the rainbow, from red to violet. It can use the 7 numbers from 1 to 7. It can use the 7 musical notes of the chromatic scale from Do to C or from C to D. So this is a language that contains a lot of different semiotic systems. And on the one hand, this contributes to its aesthetic value. But on the other hand, as you can see, sorry about this, I will dock it like that. On the other hand, this can, of course, create some limitations, as you can imagine. So here you can see different methods of visualizing SolReSol, the musical notes, the score. You can sometimes use just the names of the notes. You can use the colors. You can use the numbers, or you can use gestures, shorthand. This language has been successfully used as a tool for teaching visually impaired people, people who have some disabilities. And it has also been demonstrated by François Sudre, who was a strong proponent of this language. And he was so enthusiastic about it that many decades later, people still remembered it, even before the advent of telecommunications as we know them nowadays. So as I have said, SolReSol has a unique place among constructed languages. It is not the only musical language, of course, but it is definitely one of the first well-known languages that uses a special system of symbols. And it attracts not only linguists, but also artists, musicians, and those working on synesthesia-related projects. Synesthesia, as you understand, is the symbiosis of different feelings, of different kinds of systems that we can perceive. And of course, many of these things are arbitrary. So one can argue, for example, that a particular sound is red, but if you just go and explore that, what color is, for example, the C note? And some people might argue that it is red, but you can see a lot of different examples. Still, after mastering this particular system, you will create some strong neural connections inside your head, and will be able to communicate using these colors or maybe using the notes. There are some successful examples. And again, today I have seen that some of you wrote that you are not, let's just say, a speaker of SolReSol, and much to my shame, I must admit that neither am I. I cannot say that I'm truly fluent in SolReSol. And from my experience, I can say that not many people all over the world actually are, even though there are some communities, and I will, of course, share the links to them later in case you are interested in that. Maybe you already are familiar with some of them. But in general, we can say that this is still largely an experimental language for many people and a tool of exploration of sounds, colors, music, and such. So, as I have mentioned, SolReSol only contains, as you can see, sorry about that, SolReSol only contains 7 different notes. And what this means, of course, is that the number of words is limited. So the vocabulary, the lexis itself, has got some limitations. Because if we just do the math, we can understand that from 2 syllables, and syllables just go one after another, meaning that you use some particular note, some particular color, for example, or even a letter to replace it. We can have only 2,401 words out of 4 syllables. So François Sudre himself did not expand the vocabulary. He actually stopped there. He was not insisting on enlarging it, and he never introduced any 5-syllable words. And as you can understand, this already creates some limitations, because modern vocabulary of a natural language definitely exceeds 2,500 words. We generally know, of course, that we can have as many as 10, 20,000 words. And of course, the deeper you go into some particular sphere, for example, into some particular science, the more words you need. But it is not only about the number, it is also a very interesting thing. So very often we talk about the Eurocentrism. We talk about the impossibility of a human to devise something that is entirely new. And I know that many of you have thought of that, but it is incredibly difficult for somebody to invent something from scratch. And of course, the idea of such languages as SolReSol, which is also classified as a philosophical language, meaning that it tries to classify the world. The idea here is to reorganize it somehow, to make it more logical, to try and sometimes even review the hierarchy that we have got in the world. But there is always this flaw that the human mind has, because it will rely on some familiar elements, even while not being aware of them. So as you can see here, in order to create a word, you will simply connect several notes or several symbols. And we can see that fa-fa-re is 20, fa-fa-mi is 30, fa-fa-sol is 40. And then you can see a couple of gaps. Maybe some of you even found that. Could you perhaps write it in the chat? Is there anything you think is missing? It's maybe some of you even can understand why exactly. Yes, and why do you think it's so? Exactly, it is. So you see, and I find it fascinating, because this language is classified as an a priori language. Exactly, yes. So to an average French speaker, of course, we understand that it is not always so, because I know that there are some regional varieties of French, some dialects of the French language, where you do have a special word for that. For example, you have got 90 for 90, as I have heard. But of course, for François Sudre, this was not a problem. This wasn't anything that he deemed necessary for a language to have. So that's quite ironic, isn't it? And if we go further, we can look at the vocabulary of SolReSol. We can look at the dictionary. And normally, the words are classified. The words are classified by the so-called archisemes, which means that the words that begin with the same element should somehow be connected. It is not always so, but we can see, for example, that in numbers, as I have said, so numbers would begin with array, and after you repeat the same note twice, you will usually get a number from that. There are different combinations that are dedicated to this. Days of the week is another great example because they begin with SolReSol, and here is just very convenient that there are only 7 of them. However, if we want to talk about something particular, for example, there was this word, I think it was star or planet, I think. Let me check that. Or astronomy. Yes, I think it was astronomy. So one person wrote quite jokingly that SolReSol is not a good word, is not a good language to discuss astronomy because you have got telescope, you've got the word astronomy itself, and I think you have the word planet, but that was it. So you couldn't really name any celestial bodies in it, for example. As you can see, SolReSol is a versatile language. How do you speak SolReSol? So that is the question. Of course, there's the question of grammar. And in terms of grammar, we have got some limitations imposed by the French language again. So all of the tenses that existed in the French language in the 19th century are also followed here. And for example, for this language, it was necessary for an adjective to be either masculine or feminine, just like in the French language. So we can still see some very heavy traces. I have explored many different a priori languages, and we can safely say that SolReSol is not a language that is completely isolated from the natural language that it was actually based upon. Now, in the second part of my talk, we will get back to SolReSol. Of course, we will have a Q&A session. We will be able to discuss that. I would like to talk about my particular SolReSol journey and what exactly I have been able to create and how I was able to, in some way, popularize this language, thanks to some technology that we have got available nowadays. So I created a program, a software called SolReSol the project. This program can be downloaded from my website, and you see the link in the description of my talk. This is the same link that I'm just demonstrating now. And I first got interested in SolReSol quite a long time ago, in 2007, when we had a lecture in my university studies, in my linguistic studies, on constructed languages, and I found SolReSol to be an absolutely fascinating language, and also while I was exploring synesthesia. And another hobby of mine, except for constructed languages, is software development, game development, to be a bit more specific, just as a hobby, just for fun. And as I started exploring Unreal Engine 4, and many of you might have heard of this name, usually thanks to either video games or some animation. It is also being used in animation nowadays. And as I just started exploring this engine, I saw that there is some beautiful dynamic lighting, some beautiful ways of representing different colors. And then it struck me, as I was just going through the very first steps of tutorial of this language, that we actually might try to implement this language in the Unreal Engine. And I must say that I had never created any kinds of game development projects before that, before I started to learn how to use Unreal Engine 4. And then it was just serendipity. It's fascinating that if you really have something you're interested in, it just continues to drive you. You cannot actually stop. And this is how this language was implemented by me in Unreal Engine 4. What we have got here is a representation, a visual representation of the language. you have got different musical instruments. You've got the violin to honor François Sudre himself, who was a violinist, and you've got the piano. So here we are trying to show the symbiosis of different methods of expression. You've got the letters, you've got the notes, you've got the colors as well, and the musical and the sounds themselves. So this was my idea to show that, for example, red, orange, and green, or these three tones, or these three numbers will create this particular word in SolReSol. And it just helps people to see how exactly it works. Yes, and this is the way that you are able to experiment with it. This is the way of trying and see how it works. And it's also important, I told you about the archithemes. The thing I haven't told you about is that SolReSol has a system of antonyms built in, the opposites. I think, no, it's not fa, sol. Yes, it is fa, la. So if fa, la means good, then what do you think la, fa means? I think this is intuitive because I've just said that. So la, fa would mean bad. So it's, again, not always followed in this language, this principle. And just like you said that 80 is 420 years in the thought. So yeah, that's quite funny. Actually never thought of that. Yeah, so this is the discovery mode, to feel the language and discover new words. Another thing I try to implement is SolReSol to English translation. And here we have got a live MIDI input. So I really am curious of what François Sudre himself would say if he actually saw that. I think he probably would bash me for the incorrect implementation of the words and incorrect translation of the French vocabulary. But at the same time, this is what I try to do in order to implement trying to eliminate the extra steps of conversion from music into the human language. And let me show you a video here. So what I did is I wired the digital piano that I've got. I wired the MIDI input into the computer, and the version that you can download actually has that. It has the support, so if you've got some small keyboard. And I'm working on the implementation of this interface on mobile. So far there is no public mobile version just yet, but this is something I would like to implement at first for Android devices, and in the future maybe for the iOS devices as well. We will see about that. But then again, how it works is that you connect it, and the software will pick up not the sounds really, but just the input from the keyboard. And I am actually not a good player, but at least it is possible to input that. It actually is possible to do that technically. There are some things to be improved, but at least this is something I have been able to realize. And in the future, what of course we would like to do is also to teach it to recognize sounds, so sound recognition, even without connecting your keyboard or without connecting any other instrument through the MIDI interface. So this is something I would like to do in the future. And here, if we get back to the demonstration, you can see it's pretty much the same. Currently, I'm just using the numbers from 1 to 7 on my keyboard. So, of course, 6 would mean la, yes, and for example, number 4 would mean fa. So I've just told you about the word bad, la, fa, and The visuals here are, of course, quite colorful. Yes, they're quite shiny, and this is one of the things that attracts people to it if they just see it. And this is what I wanted to touch upon. Yes, I wanted to touch upon promoting your linguistic projects. So the project I have got here is a non-profit one, of course. I have been hosting it on my website for quite a long time. I sometimes would ask for donations if people wanted to just help me with the web hosting, because it's very important for everybody to be independent. It's very important not to host it on just one platform where the link can easily get lost and where it can simply disappear one day, because you have heard of this expression that if something is free, then you are the product. And as soon as the platform owners go through some kind of an acquisition, for example, or as soon as they change the business model of the website, it can easily happen that your project will disappear. So in order to prevent that, I'm hosting it on my domain, and this is what is very important to me. However, there was a kind of a flaw here, because as you can see, if you go to my website right now, I've got this piece of news where it says that site is under construction. So it is being restored following domain hijacking. So sadly, I am not flawless myself in terms of preservation, and I did not do regular backups. Fortunately, so this is a kind of a warning. So if you work on something like this, you must do regular backups. And I do have the backup of the content that I wrote myself, but it doesn't transfer automatically to the hosting system. So there are some technicalities. But fortunately, the copy of my website was kept on the Wayback Machine. So I'm slowly restoring that. But speaking of popularizing SolReSol, as soon as I made some videos, such as the one that I have just demonstrated to you, I started getting some kinds of comments. I started posting on Reddit. I started posting on C2C, which is a great resource managed by Dan Parson. And many of you may have heard of it. This is the go-to resource for SolReSol. And actually C2C itself means to learn. Yes, this is the translation of the word C2C in SolReSol into English. And as soon as I started just posting links to this website and inviting people to take a look at it, I started to receive different emails from people. People started contacting me on social media, asking me not only about this project, but about SolReSol in general. And I'm on the one hand, of course, honored by that. But on the other hand, I feel the responsibility, and I'm somewhat even embarrassed to say that I'm not such an expert on SolReSol and the technicalities of its grammar and lexis. But I just analyzed the Google Trends, and I saw that there was actually a kind of a spike in the interest, in the global interest to SolReSol, which was connected to such events as, for example, Atlas Obscura, publishing in 2018, as you can see that happened, publishing an article on SolReSol. And they contacted me, they asked me for the permission to use my video, which was a demonstration of SolReSol itself. And I think this is absolutely beautiful. This is a great way to revive some projects. Again, it doesn't have to be about constructed languages. If you are here, then you're definitely a language enthusiast, and you're interested in languages per se. And this is just an idea that even one person as a solo, not necessarily developer, but as a solo project manager, just an enthusiast, is able to attract attention of the global population to some particular linguistic feature, be it a language or maybe a particular aspect of a language, or even your own project itself. And one of such things, so I was contacted by conlang enthusiasts, I was contacted by some academics who are simply writing some research on SolReSol, and one of the most interesting projects that was inspired by SolReSol is this so-called bird translator by a gentleman named Jim Lloyd. So he, as he told me, inspired by the software that he saw, created a Raspberry Pi device that serves for the only purpose of translating the language of birds into English. So what it does is that it analyzes the frequency and converts this into musical notes. And as you can see, it's even a standalone device. It's more than just a program. It's more than just the software. And here he goes into detail of how it actually works. And you can even see the sounds that he recorded and how it is analyzed, which is, I think, taking it to the next level. So this is what I wanted to tell you. Of course, some people talk about the impracticality of constructed languages, but again, as I have said, it's just a beautiful way of exploring languages, culture, and also a form of artistic expression in many ways as well. And of course, when we talk about SolReSol, that there is the musical element that is incredibly strong, and that's why I wanted to implement the solfege mode into my program. And as you can see here, you first see the musical note here, but then as you progress, you can even try and do that just playing by the ear. And for example, as we hear the note now, yes, we can try to do that. And for example, this is not right. Yeah, I'm not very good at that, but just talking about intervals, technically, one can do that. And this is my answer to the people who say that in order to understand the language of music, you have to have a good musical ear. And some people believe that they're hopeless at that. But I always say that nobody is entirely hopeless at music, and that there can definitely be a lot of things that improve that, and I tried to build this in. And finally, the last feature that I had here, which is more of a meditative thing, as we can say, is this. This is the chaos mode. So it generates some sounds, it generates some music, if you could say so. And based on that, you see different words. And I would sometimes just show this to people. And what's interesting is that, as you know, the human mind tends to try and find the meaning in everything. And just by turning on a random 5-minute video of randomly generated music and sounds, people started to identify some patterns, and they may even see something apocalyptic there. They may see some important, maybe political message if they want to, or simply create some pictures, some visual image in their mind, which is also interesting when we talk about SolReSol as a semantic and semiotic system. So this is what I wanted to tell you about today. Of course, the scope of my presentation, the time limit, doesn't allow me to tell you everything that I wanted to, but here are the main points. And in order to learn more about SolReSol, as I have said, you can visit the CDOC resource. There is still no such thing as a SolReSol complete course. So there is no such thing as SolReSol 101, which is the go-to resource, but there are, of course, some tutorials. There are some interesting materials. The book itself, written by one of the pupils of François Sudre, whose name is Boris Gajewski, itself is more of a descriptive piece. So what I would like to do in the future is perhaps create some MOOC, some online course regarding SolReSol, or maybe even try to incorporate this into my software. But there is one very important limitation that I forgot to mention when we talk about translating from English into SolReSol, which is also implemented here. So we have the keyword input, for example, we can write the word here, yes, and we can write some other things, yes. Unfortunately, there is no grammar implemented just yet. And of course, if we talk about a machine translation, you know that one of the best examples is, of course, Google Translate, or also there is DeepL and some other machine translation tools. But all of them are based on large corpora of texts. And as you can imagine, there are no parallel texts in SolReSol and English. There are some, but it is not enough for the AI, for the artificial intelligence, to create a particular algorithm. It is not enough for them to analyze it and be able to create some, what we call concordance, which would be the parallel description, the parallel, not really description, but the parallel correspondence of what we have got in English and SolReSol. And that's really a pity. So in case we want to do that, when it comes to not very popular conlangs, machine translation is highly limited. But this is still a job to be done. So maybe in the future we can do something like that. Okay, so have we got any questions, perhaps? We do have a bit of time for the Q&A. And you can unmute yourself. You can simply speak if you want to. Yes, okay, so let's start with the question in the chat. You have a question about SolReSol. Next one, in your research, did you find if there was anything from François Sudre and addressing SolReSol and color blindness? Oh, that's a great question. Color blindness, I don't think that François Sudre himself addressed that directly, but I think that the solution that they would propose, because it was done, as far as I know, even when he was alive and teaching this language, is to use the gestures. Yes, to use the gestures, to use the shorthand as well. So going for a different kind. Actually, even though I like to put the emphasis on colors, for him it was primarily a language of sounds, yes, rather than colors. So I think this is the way in which they would address it. And of course, if we talk about modern technology, there are a lot of tools we can use. And actually, thank you for that, Lara. I think I might include a color blind mode, as they say, in order to maybe increase contrast between different colors. And there are, of course, different kinds of color blindness, I know, and it is a user experience feature that I think can be implemented. Then we've got, yes, thank you. Do you have a list of links, especially links to SolReSol communities? Yes. So as I have mentioned, probably the best place to start will be C2C. So I will simply copy this link here by Dan Parson, because this is a hub that tries to incorporate all kinds of resources. So you can see here, resources, beta, resources, old. There is also the subreddits. There is also the Discord. And this is what we can say. Yes. Okay. Yes, then we've got this. It seems to be a list of words, not quite a language. Is there some grammar in addition to the word list? Yes. So as I have said, this is the flaw of my project that currently exists, because there is grammar. Grammar, and you can read about the Gajewski. Yes, so grammar, SolReSol. This is a publicly available text, which is again found on C2C. You can see that it has all of the tenses, it has conditionals, it can, it is of course somewhat limited, yes, but if we think about, what I absolutely like about constructed languages is that they broaden our horizons. For example, to an average speaker of a European language, it seems absolutely necessary to have, for example, the future tense. But there are a lot of languages that do not have any tenses at all, or would rather have only the present and the past. And it doesn't mean that they're not able to talk about the future, it's just that their language has a different way of expressing that through lexes, or through vocabulary rather than grammar. But here again, to answer your question, yes, we've got the masculine and the feminine form, we've got the plurals, and here is the question of how this could be somehow changed, yes, because depending on the system, it might be a bit challenging because, for example, if it's a color, you can make this color more intense. If it is a sound, you can make it louder, or maybe you can shift the pitch. So yeah, there are some arguments regarding that. Next question, I'm curious about synesthesia could struggle with SolReSol. Oh, yes, yes, I could only imagine if people with the actual synesthesia, yes, rather than just the phenomenon I'm discussing, would actually feel about it. Yeah, I am afraid it might even, it would create a serious dissonance for them. Yes, so that's actually a good point, because as I understand, it will be different for all people. They will not necessarily follow the same semiotic system that we've got there. How similar is also to Toki-Pona, since they both have limited vocabulary? Yes, well, Toki-Pona is a language I know that is very well loved in the conlang community, and I did read about it, did look at the examples. I think that Toki-Pona is much more well designed than SolReSol. I think that its simplicity is one of its inherent features, unlike SolReSol, which is still largely based on the French language. So I think Toki-Pona is much more perfect in this way, sadly. So SolReSol is still the French language, let's just put it that way. For example, you have got a lot of terms that describe various titles of people in the Catholic Church, because it's just the reality in which François Sudre lived, and for him it was necessary. So he might have not had a lot of terms to describe some area of life that we deem important nowadays, but he did have a lot of things for the somewhat maybe not very important concepts by modern standards for some people. So this is what I could say about that. Okay, maybe any other questions? Got? Yes, and I understand that we are running out of time. So once again, thank you everybody. I hope that despite the limitations of my presentation, you have been able to learn something about SolReSol. And again, as a as the last words, I would really like to say that I really wish you best of luck. If you have got some ideas about some maybe language-related projects that you in the future would like to promote or maybe design, feel free to send me a message, because you've got my website, you've got the contact details. Because a lot of things that I think about when it comes to languages, I know that a lot of people who are interested in linguistics are not necessarily always practical people. I find it very important to be a little bit of an entrepreneur, if we don't talk about the financial side, but if we talk about the way of maybe capturing the attention of the audience. And I can easily help you with that, because I'm always happy to empower people and help them to achieve their goals if they want to. So thank you everyone. Yes.